She hasn't said a word about how she feels, but her hands already have. There is something happening in conversations you've already had, maybe recently, maybe more times than you can count, and you walked away from it without knowing what it meant. Not because you weren't paying attention, not because you weren't interested, but because no one ever told you where to look. Most men spend an entire conversation watching a woman's face, listening to her words, trying to read the story she is consciously choosing to tell. And that is exactly the problem. Because the most honest signal she is sending you is not in her words. It is not even in her expression. It is in something far more involuntary than either of those things. There is a specific thing she does, not toward you, but to herself, that her body produces without her permission, without her awareness, and almost always without her intending for you to see it. And it happens in places most men never think to look. By the end of this video, you will be able to see it clearly, in real conversations, in real time. What she cannot bring herself to say, her body has already been saying. You just need to know how to read it. Here is something most people don't realize. A woman's body begins responding to attraction before her mind catches up. Not by seconds, by hundreds of milliseconds. Neuroscientists studying attraction response have documented a consistent gap between the moment a physical or emotional reaction begins in the body and the moment the conscious mind registers it as a feeling. What this means in practical terms is that a woman can be genuinely unaware of how attracted she is to a man while her body is already communicating it clearly. This is where self-touch enters the picture. When the nervous system is managing a feeling it hasn't yet processed into conscious thought, it looks for physical outlets. Small, quiet ones. Gestures that release a tiny fraction of the internal tension without requiring any decision to act. Psychologists sometimes call this self-regulatory touch, the body's way of managing emotional activation it cannot yet put into words. It is not performance. It is not flirtation in the deliberate sense. It is the body handling something it hasn't been given permission to express any other way. That is why self-touch during attraction is so reliable. It isn't chosen, it happens. You might be thinking, couldn't any of this just be fidgeting, nervous habit? And that is a fair question, and one worth holding on to as we go through this. The difference between random fidgeting and attraction-linked self-touch is something you will be able to see once you understand what specific zones carry specific meaning and what the surrounding context tells you. One gesture in isolation tells you very little. A pattern in a specific location with a specific quality of movement that tells you something real. The neck is one of the most neurologically sensitive structures on the human body. It contains a dense concentration of nerve endings, sits at the junction of two major arterial pathways, and in evolutionary terms has always been one of the body's most protected and most vulnerable zones. This matters for one specific reason. When a woman touches her own neck during a conversation with a man, she is, at a level below conscious decision, drawing attention to a part of her body she would never expose to someone who felt threatening. Exposing the neck is, at its most fundamental, a signal of safety, of openness, of a nervous system that has assessed this person and decided it is not in danger. Of course, context always matters here. A woman might touch her neck when she is tired, when her muscles are tense, when she is on a phone call with her bank. Neck touch alone, stripped of context, means nothing specific. But when it happens during an interaction with you, particularly when combined with the quality of her attention, it changes. Watch for the fingertips resting lightly at the collarbone, just below the throat. Watch for a slow, almost absent-minded stroke along the side of the neck while she is listening to you speak. Watch for the chin tilting slightly upward, which is not accidental, because it lengthens the neck and exposes more of it, paired with a soft hold in eye contact. These are not isolated movements, they are a cluster, and the cluster is what matters. The common mistake men make here is noticing the neck touch but then looking away, either because they don't know what they've seen or because they feel awkward having noticed something that feels private. But she is not doing this to hide it from you. Her body is doing it because you are there. The neck gets most of the attention in conversations about attraction signals. But there's a zone closer to the center of her body that carries an even more direct signal, one that almost no one talks about. There is a difference between a woman touching her chest because she is nervous and touching it because something in her body is responding to you. And that difference is visible once you know what to look for. The collarbone and upper sternum area sits directly above the heart. When attraction arousal begins, heart rate elevates. This is not metaphor, it is physiology. And the body, noticing this internal change, will sometimes respond with touch to the area where that change is most physically felt. It is the same mechanism that causes people to place a hand on their own chest when they receive surprising news. The gesture is a response to internal activation. When a woman lightly traces her collarbone, the tips of her fingers moving slowly along that ridge of bone, or rests her hand open against her upper chest while she is engaged in conversation with you, pay attention to her posture in that moment. If her shoulders are drawn in, if her body is angled away, if her gaze is wandering, the touch is anxiety. That is self-protection. But if her posture is open, if she is leaning in even slightly, if her eyes are on you while her hand moves, that is something different. That is the body acknowledging, quietly, that something is happening inside it. The specific detail most men miss is the pace of the movement. Anxious chest touching is quick, interrupted, often repeated in rapid succession. Attraction-linked chest touching is slower, almost leisurely, as if the hand has nowhere else it needs to be. Both of those zones, the neck and the upper chest, are visible, elevated, easily within the normal range of where a man's attention might travel in conversation. But the next signal happens in a place she is almost certainly not aware of, and it is one of the most revealing things her body can do. This one is easy to miss, partly because it happens so gently and partly because she is almost certainly not doing it on purpose. The inner wrist is one of the body's traditional vulnerability display zones. Primatologists who study human and primate behavior have noted that exposing the inner wrist, the soft, thin-skinned surface where the pulse is felt, is a deeply ingrained openness signal. In situations of threat or discomfort, the wrist rotates inward, protecting that surface. In situations of safety and attraction, it rotates outward. This is not a conscious choice. It is old wiring. When a woman is sitting across from you or standing close to you, and her inner wrist is turned upward, resting on a table, held loosely at her side, or lifted toward her face in conversation, it is worth noticing. Not because it means everything on its own, but because it is a sign that her nervous system has categorized you as safe, as someone she can be open toward. The more specific signal is when she lightly strokes her own inner forearm while talking. Not scratching, not a purposeful movement, a slow, almost self-soothing motion, fingertips trailing from the crook of the elbow down toward the wrist. Researchers studying touch in social bonding contexts have observed that this type of self-directed touch occurs with elevated frequency in the presence of people we feel drawn toward. The body is in a sense practicing the sensation of being touched by touching itself. You might walk through 100 conversations and never register the signal once. not because it doesn't happen, but because it happens in the quiet peripheral space of interaction, not at the center of it. Start letting your attention move to the edges of what she is doing with her hands, and you will begin to see things you never noticed before. What you have seen so far are signals that can happen at any conversational distance. But the next one is most commonly misread by the men who actually notice it, which is almost as costly as missing it entirely. Hair touching is probably the one signal you have already heard about, which is exactly why it is the most misread one in the room. Because most men have been told that a hair flip means attraction, they do one of two things. They overread it, treating any contact between her hand and her hair as confirmation, or they dismiss it entirely because they have heard it too many times and it feels like a cliche. Both responses miss the actual signal. There are two meaningfully different types of hair touching, and they look different when you know what to watch for. The first is grooming anxiety, a quick, almost impatient motion, usually paired with a brief glance away or downward, often repeated at irregular intervals. This is self-consciousness. She is checking how she looks, managing her appearance because she feels observed. It is not meaningless. Feeling self-conscious in your presence is its own kind of signal, but it is not the same as what I am about to describe. The second type is slower. Her hand moves to her hair without urgency. She might tuck a strand behind her ear, but she does it while holding your gaze, not while looking away. She might run her fingers lightly through the length of her hair in a motion that has no practical purpose, that rearranges nothing, that is simply happening while she is near you. And then she returns to the conversation as if nothing occurred, because for her, nothing consciously did. The compound signal to watch for is this: the hair tuck behind the ear paired with a slight neck exposure and maintained eye contact. Three things happening in close sequence: the hair moved, the neck revealed, the eyes staying on you. When you see all three together, you are watching something real. Remember what I said at the beginning, that there was one signal most men not only miss, but actively misread? We are getting close to it now. But before we arrive there, there is a signal that may be the most psychologically intimate of all the ones we have covered. Of all the places her hand can travel, the mouth area is the one that lives closest to what she hasn't let herself say yet. The mouth sits at an intersection that is unique in the body. It is the site of speech, of every word she has not yet decided to say, and it is also, at a neurological level, one of the areas most directly connected to anticipatory sensation. Researchers studying subconscious desire response have noted that involuntary attention to the mouth, including self-directed touch to the lips or jaw, increases in the presence of someone the body is responding to. The touch is not preparation, it is the body noticing something. Here's what this looks like in a real conversation. She is listening to you, and without shifting her focus from you, her fingertip comes to rest lightly against her lower lip. Not a prolonged gesture, not theatrical, just a touch that lands and lingers for a moment before her hand drops again. Or she brings her fingers to her chin while she considers what you've said, but her eyes stay soft and forward, not upward and away the way they do when someone is genuinely thinking through a problem. Or she pauses before responding to you, a beat longer than necessary, and in that pause, her lips part slightly as if something was about to be said and then wasn't. The distinction that matters here, and this is the detail most analyses skip over, is what her eyes are doing. When someone touches their jaw in a thinking gesture, the eyes typically move up and to one side. The brow may furrow slightly, the attention goes inward. When someone touches their jaw or lip because they are physically responding to the presence of a person, the eyes stay outward. They stay on you. The touch is happening at the edge of her awareness while her real attention remains where it wants to be. Of course, not every lip touch carries this meaning, But when the lip or jaw touch appears in a moment of stillness, when she is not talking, not presenting, simply receiving you, and her face is soft and her attention is forward, you are watching her body manage something it hasn't decided to put into words. Everything covered so far is detectable to a man who is paying attention. But the final signal in this list is the one that almost never gets named, because it happens so quietly that most men walk right past it, not once, but every time. This is the one I save for last, not because it is rare, but because it is the one that happens right in front of men who are genuinely interested and still goes completely unseen. When a woman lightly touches her own waist, lower ribs or abdomen during interaction with a man she is attracted to, it is one of the strongest and least discussed self-touch signals in the entire attraction literature. It does not appear in most lists. It is not the signal people think of first. And precisely because of that, it almost never gets filtered through performance or deliberate behavior. She is not doing this because she has seen it described somewhere and thinks it will work. She is doing it because her body is doing it. Here is the psychological mechanism. Attraction arousal produces a specific kind of heightened physical self-awareness, a subtle but real shift in how the body experiences its own presence. The abdomen and waist area is deeply connected to what some researchers describe as body readiness attention, the nervous system's process of registering its own physical state in response to an external stimulus it finds compelling. When a woman is attracted to someone near her, this area of the body receives more of her internal attention. And occasionally, that internal attention becomes external touch. Watch for her hand resting on her hip with the fingers trailing inward toward the waist, rather than gripping the hip outward in a posture of containment. Watch for a brief light contact at the lower ribs or waist when she laughs, not the full body motion of genuine laughter, but a touch that seems to ground her in her own body in that moment. Watch for a small adjustment of clothing at the waist, straightening a hem, smoothing a fabric, that happens not because anything is out of place, but because her hand has moved there without her sending it. This signal almost always indicates attraction and rarely has an alternative explanation because there is no social script for touching your own waist. No one does this out of nervousness in the way they might fidget with their hair. No one does it out of habit the way they might tap a finger. It happens because the body is registering something and the waist is where that registration lands. You might be thinking back through recent conversations now, wondering if you have already seen this and didn't recognize it for what it was. That is a reasonable thing to wonder. What all of these signals share is this: they are not performances. They are not strategic moves in a social game. They are the body telling the truth before the mind has decided to. A woman who is attracted to you and hasn't said so is not withholding the information maliciously. In most cases, she is genuinely still processing it herself. What you have now is the ability to see what she has not yet found words for. None of this means you should begin cataloging every gesture in every conversation. That is not the point, and it would make you a worse conversationalist, not a better one. The value of understanding these signals is not hypervigilance. It is a quiet background awareness. You now know where to let your attention rest. You know what a cluster of these signals looks like and what it means when you see it. Her body has been communicating for as long as you have known her. Now you can hear it. Which of these signals have you noticed in a woman recently without realizing at the time what it meant? Tell me in the comments. One word is enough. If this kind of quiet, clear-eyed understanding of female behavior is what you come here for, stay close to this channel because this is exactly what we do here. And in the next video, I am going to show you something even more subtle. It is not what she does with her hands. It is what happens to her voice when she is talking to a man she cannot stop thinking about. That one will change how you listen forever.